Pray with me. Jesus, I thank you so much for your grace as it rains upon me and all of us. And Father, your greatness and your power that we get to be a part of. And Lord, I thank you for that. Father, as your word is spoken here, Lord, I call for your Spirit to come lead and come open hearts. And so let none of this be on me, and let this be on you, Father. So give this in your name. Amen. I was going to come up in a hairnet and like a greasy cutoff to officially make myself a lunch lady, but I chose not to. Yeah, I'm so honored to be, actually when I got Jonathan Bauer's email, I had to read it twice because I thought he was asking for like some kind of catering thing for BCS. So I was like, wait, what? And then I read it again. I'm like, oh, this has nothing to do with food. So I'm so glad. I'm so honored. If you would go into culinary school, the first thing you do is they sit you down, they put on your fancy outfit. I didn't go to culinary school, but I read about it once. So what they do is they put you in the fancy outfit, and the first thing they teach you, like a lot of culinary schools are based on French training, French style of training, so they use a lot of French words. So what they do is when they train you, the first thing they teach you in is how to do it. What they call is mise en place, and it's fancy French word for saying put in place. And when they do that, you literally, when you do your mise en place, because you always, when I worked in restaurants, and you always hear the chef yelling, mise en place, guys, get your mise en place. Basically, what you do is you do all your prep work, right? So you would, like if you had to do carrots, get all your carrots cut, get, all your meats that you need done, and you get, all the veggies that need to be cut. So it's right in front of you, and then when it comes time to cook, you can just kind of grab it all. And so you don't have to be doing like 50 different things. So in the way that I'm going to do the talk, we're going to start with the mise en place first. So I'm going to kind of set it up, and then, like I said, it's going to be like a big burrito, and then we'll wrap up the burrito sermon type thing going. So let's start with our mise here. Let's start in Matthew 5:13, and we'll go to 16. It says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Now, we know this text as it's part of the Sermon on the Mount, right? The most iconic sermon ever preached. There's so much text out there. There's so much reference on this, on Matthew 5 here. So. And what we do is we start at, if we start at verse 2 to verse 12, it's the blessed, right? Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are the ones who mourn, and blessed are the ones who are pure in heart, right? Jesus goes down this list. Now, as he goes down this list, what you start seeing is that he kind of sets an identity for the people, right? So the people that are gathering to come watch him speak, they aren't the guys in the nice suits and the fancy cars. Like these are the desperate people. These are the ones who are low. And as they're coming to watch Jesus, to hear what this prophet or what this new guy has to say, that's where he starts. See, I think it's really interesting that that's where he starts. He starts on the area of identity. He restores their identity, right? He starts talking to the people who are the poor, who are the meek, who are the gentle at heart. He gives it back to them. He gives the kingdom back to them. And then what I find that's interesting is the best way that I make it work in my head in illustration is I see William Wallace, right? You know that great movie Braveheart. William Wallace comes out in front of his men, and they're all like scared, like the English are too many. I can't do the Scottish accent, so it's like the English are too many, And then what does Wallace do? He gets, he's on his horse and he's painted blue and everything, and what does he do? He gathers them, right? And he gives them an identity. He gives them, a cause. And then he does his great speech, and everyone's yelling, and so that's kind of how I see it in my mind when I read that first, the blessed part from verse 2 to verse 12, and then he jumps into the salt and the light. Now here's what's very interesting to me when I look at this text is now if we're going to do like the mise en place, now you see that Jesus has given them an identity. He has called them and said, this is who you are, this, to the kingdom. And then he starts talking about salt and light. And I remember when I was reading this, I was like, what? So to me, it's he gathers them together and then the next part here in the salt and light is he constructs them, right? Because here's the thing, as I've worked with many chefs, and there's so many great chefs I worked with, but the one thing I've learned when it comes to working in the kitchen, when it comes to cooking, is the number one secret ingredient, besides love, is salt. Salt is the most underutilized seasoning. Like, you don't have to use all the special like eucalyptus flower and lavender pollen and all that snazzy stuff. It's salt. Why? Because the molecular cellular core of salt, what it does is it brings out flavor. It actually brings out moisture. Within the moisture is the flavor. So salt has two big uses in the culinary world. It has preserving and it has seasoning. So, for example, you go to Rainbow or some grocery store and you grab a 16-ounce nice prime dry aged cut of New York strip with perfect marbling, right? What you do is then you take some kind of sea salt, kosher salt, and you sprinkle it on. If you layer that salt right on there, and when you sprinkle it on, you walk away for 2 minutes, you come back, and then you notice that there's this almost like this kind of pool of the pool of blood is kind of out there. That's actually the flavor that's out there. So what salt does is it extracts flavor from. So really, when you're cooking and when you put salt in it, what you're actually doing is you're bringing the flavor out. So when you're eating something, you're like, this doesn't taste as good. Just put a little bit more salt in there. That's the secret. And now I'm done. We're out of it. No. So he says, you're the salt of the earth, right? He says, you're the salt of the earth. Jesus is talking about here, and what he does is he says, you're the salt of the earth, so then he gives the identity to them, and then he commissions them. He tells them that you are the salt of the earth. And then he says, you are, then in the other analogy he uses, you are the light of the world. And I, when I was preparing this, I was thinking about, I'm like, light, like what does light do? One thing light does is it brings, it shows what the darkness hides. Light offers hope. This is very apparent to me. I grew up in my childhood anyway. I grew up in Pennsylvania, like Lancaster County, like right with the Amish in the Mennonite. Talk about weird, right? So we got this Hmong kid who grew up right in the middle of the Amish and Mennonite, and we would always, as kids, we look at each other like, what are you? I'm like, I don't know, what are you? I don't know, you guys ride horses, and and so it was really confusing as a child. But anyways, I remember the blizzard of 95. Right? I feel old when I can say that. Blizzard of 95. I don't know, some of you weren't even born yet. But the blizzard of 95. And I remember that we lived out in the countryside, right? So all the electricity and stuff was out. We were water, so it's kind of like, like today we call that a Wednesday, like here. But blizzard 95, everything's going down, everything's bad, and we had this neighbor that lived like a quarter mile. At that time, it felt like 50 miles, but it's probably a quarter mile away. And my parents were like, okay, here's the deal. They have a generator, they have electricity, they have water. We're gonna make the trek, right? And I'm like, what? And this is like, out in the country, nothing. And I remember we started making this trek. We started getting, we got everything on, and then we started going because that's the only way, that was the only thing we had. We lived out in the country, so we started trekking, and I remember it got so cold and it was so dark that I couldn't see anything. And I remember my dad just kept, my mom just kept, we keep walking, and so the story's probably not this bad, but in my mind, I remembered. The snow was up to my waist, there was wind blowing from the north, south, east, everything, and so we were just kind of walking, and I remember I was so tired as a kid, and I was like, I don't think I can make it. But the thing that gave me hope was their porch light was on. And so I kept telling myself as a kid, I'm like, if I walk towards that little beam of light, that's my hope, right? And when Jesus says, you are the light of the world, a city on the hill, he's telling these people who, when they came, they were poor and they were meek and they had nothing. He gives them identity and he tells them, blessed are you. And then he says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. So let's do a quick overview here. Jesus gathers the people around him. He restores their identity. He offers them hope. And then with a new sense of identity, he commissions them to the world. I think what's so interesting here is he doesn't say, you are the salt of Jerusalem, or you're the salt of Rome, or you're the salt of the earth. You're telling me that the people that came to listen to Jesus had nothing, they felt like they had nothing to offer. And what does Jesus do? He restores them, right? That's the gospel right there. And he redeems them, and then he sends them to the earth, to the world. And then when I look at this text and I say, if I take this text and I say what I've learned in my life and what I've seen, it comes down to this. It comes down to my people. Yeah, the Hmong people here are, it's I think the second largest people group, population. Minority population here. Unofficially, I think they're about 35,000. Around there, 35,000, 40,000 around there unofficially in the Twin Cities area. A lot of times we just get thrown into the Asian mix, so it's like, yeah, it's all of us. The migration of the Hmong people from Southeast Asia to the Twin Cities, which, okay, here's the deal. Everyone always looks at me and goes, dude, you guys grew up in the Pacific. That's sun and tropics, and then why Minnesota? Which is complete opposite weather-wise. And what happened was a lot of the Lutheran churches and Methodist churches started sponsoring the Hmong people, and a lot of that was out of the Vietnam War. And after the war and everything, they were escaping as refugees. But the story of the Hmong people actually goes back further than that. In the late 1940s, 48, I think, Ted and Ruth Andronoff was this young missionary couple, right? They were attending this missions conference, and at that time, the cool place, the place that everybody wanted to go was China. So everybody, they were sending people to China, and in Ruth Andronoff's diary, she wrote, she was like, they were hoping that they get sent to China, and they were excited, and then I think it was Ted who he said he heard about these people group in the mountains of Laos that have never been touched. So they prayed through a process of prayer. They felt like God was calling them to that. They met up with this Laotian Bible student who he has been working with the Hmong people. His name was Nai King. So when they came to Laos, they did some language training in 49, and then they met up with Nai King, who knows a little bit, but again, this is before the days of computers and everything. It's more of, well, let's just pack a bag and let's go in there, right? And to get to where the Hmong people was in the providence of where they were, was you had to fly by plane to get in, and where you land the plane was dirt. So you kind of hope that maybe it's clear. You get in there, and then you pack your stuff, and then you hike to the villages. The Hmong people were known as the mountain people or the hill people because they were despised by the Laotian people. So all the fertile land is on the bottom, right? Because when it rains, all the water comes down. That's where all the fertile land is. Since they weren't liked by the Laotian people, they were all chased to live in the mountains. So they were known as the hill tribes. So the Andronophs, we have the Andronophs here. We have Nai King and him and his wife, and they made the trek. They get into the village. This is the first time. There's white people coming to this village. They get in there, and Nai King needs a place to stay, right? He needs a house. So they go and they're like, can we look for a house? And so they said, hey, there's this guest house. And when I say guest house, it's more of like a shack. I hope you guys don't think it's like, oh yeah, they got nice air beds and everything. No. So they said there's this guest house, but the guy who owns the house, he's the shaman of the village. So he's the in that he would basically be the spiritual leader. He's the one who he does all the chants, seances. He calls the spirits. Anyway, but what Nai King was told is that guest house is haunted. Nobody has ever stayed there for longer than a night. So Nai King, this young Laotian Bible student, him and his wife, they're like, yeah, we'll take it, great waterfront property. So they go and they stay there. First night goes by, second nights go by, third nights go by. They stay there for a week. And the people started gathering because they're like, wait, they're still there? So when they came to ask him, what happened? They're asking, what's going on? And Nai King goes, they're like, this house is haunted. There's evil spirits in this house. He goes, the first night we were there, we heard some noise. My wife and I got on our knees and we prayed. And it has been quiet ever since. That, with the mix of what happened later on, the shaman, his cousin's wife was sick, and she was really ill, and she wasn't getting any better. And when they heard about the God of Nai King and the Andronophs, they asked the wives to go pray for her. The wife, Ruth Andronoff writes that she and Nai King's wife goes and prays for her, and she is immediately healed. That perplexed the shaman so much that he goes, your God is more powerful than our evil spirits we're in. So the shaman decides, I'm done with this. He throws everything away. His family becomes believers. A few months after that, the Andronoff has to leave because there's a missions, they have like one of those missions conference, like a summit in Vietnam. So they leave for Vietnam. What happens in the time when they left was that the rainy season came in. So remember when I said that patch of land where they land, it's gone now. When the rainy season comes in, it turns into like a lake or something, So for 6 months, they couldn't get back to the village. They had you couldn't just dial up on your iPhone and, Skype in. So they didn't know what was going on for 6 months. So they left Nai King there. And Nai King, he was pretty young in his faith still, young guy. But here's the crazy thing too, right? Nai King doesn't speak Hmong, he speaks Laotian, right? The Hmong people, they don't speak Laotian, they speak Hmong. So they have they got a guy who speaks English, has to speak broken Laotian to the Laotian guy who then speaks to the Hmong guy who then speaks back in broken Laotian. So that was the way they did missions for the first few months. 6 months goes by, finally clears up. They go back, and the Andronoffs go back, and they land the plane. They get up to the village. They walk to the village, and that shaman, the first shaman there that became a believer, and Nai King, they both walk up to them when they first came into the village. They walk up to them, and they hand them a notebook. In this notebook was over 1,000 names of converts in the last 6 months. I'm reading this, and I remember reading this, and I was blown. I'm like, did they move the decimal wrong? Did they mean 100? I look, and it was 1,000. In 6 months after that, the Andronoffs and Nai King would go from village to village along the hillsides, Hmong village. In less than a year, 4,500 Hmong people became believers. Threw away everything. They would have, Ted Andernoff would write back to the denomination that he was with, and he would say that they would just get random people come to their door, and he says, we hear that your God is more powerful than the evil spirits. Tell me about your God. One of the stories he tells is they go into this village, and there was this lady, kind of long hair, and everything you would imagine what a witch would look like. The old Hmong lady, long hair, comes up to them, and they're kind of like, okay, what's going to happen now? She comes up to them, and she looks at them, and she goes, are you the one? And, Ted Andernoff's like, the one what? She goes, I had a dream many moons ago that there would be a white man that would come into our village, and this white man will tell us about the one true God. I want to know, are you the one? And boom, that village was. When I think about that, I think of salt. I think of light. I think of Nye King and his wife, Ted and Ruth Andernoff, as flakes of salt sprinkled into this little corner of Laos. Where then from there, we have over 30,000 Hmong professing Christians in the United States. Over 80-some churches and still growing. Now the Hmong people are sending people back as missionaries into Laos and Thailand. Little flakes of salt sprinkled to draw out the glory of God that he already instilled in there. The flavors of the earth. Little sparkle of light that offers hope. That in this area, in this time of desperation, where I don't say the Hmong people as a third person standing outside, but as I could say my people is offered hope. And in here, Matthew writes, he says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. I want that to sink in with you, my brothers and sisters. I want that. I could stand here. I come here, I can stand here because God used the sprinkle of salt in the corner of the earth. And by his grace, I could stand here. So I'm a testament to that flavor that was drawn out, I guess, if you want to call it. The Andernoffs, I hear a lot of people, I listen to some of the interviews, and, there's some people that are saying, if the Andernoffs didn't come to Laos, or, there probably wouldn't be any Hmong Christians. I don't know. I believe God used the right people. If it wasn't them, it would have been another couple, or, another mission group, I believe that. While this was going on, in my own personal story, what happens then is, then my grandfather, through that, what started happening was little like miniature Bible schools were starting to open up in these villages, and if you had a son who can read and write, what they do is the Hmong villages would start sending their sons to these Bible training centers. And I remember I read a story once that one of the big things that these little training Bible centers that needed were pencils. Like, literally, there was a story of this guy who, one of the students who would use his pencil up till it was literally a little, inch nub. And then he would save those so that he could write scripture with. And I think about that, and I think about how that was the foreground of laying God's work being laid out for me, for my family to be here. So I say to you again, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Pray with me. Lord, I am reminded constantly of your grace here. I am reminded constantly of your greatness, how you came to my people who knew nothing about you, who didn't deserve you, but out of your grace, you came through Nai-King and the Andronophs, and the gospel was brought to us. Where I could stand here today in Minneapolis, Minnesota, thousands of miles from my homeland where I was born, and get to exclaim this gospel to everyone. Lord, I am truly grateful. So I pray for these brothers and sisters out here, Lord. I pray that they be the salt of the earth and they be the light of the world. Thank you so much, God. And the glory be to you. In your name, amen.